Now, this morning we're placing the spotlight on water scarcity in the country. It can be driven by population density, climate change and pollution. Now, South Africans use about 237 litres per person per day, and that's way above the global average of 173 litres. So let's look at what can be done to mitigate the impact. We're joined by environmental activist Desmond D'sa. Thank you for your time, Desmond. Good morning to you. That fact there, South Africans using about 237 litres per person per day. This is over the global average water consumption. Why is it high for our country?
Well, good morning, and good morning to the listeners. I think that the facts are not being placed where the people use that. You know, there's a difference between the class difference between the rich and the poor. In the rich areas, they use a lot of water, whereas in the poor areas, there's absolutely no water. So people do not have access to water. And I think to place everybody in the same category is just not right. I think we need to be clear here. We have seen that rich people who have a huge amount of swimming pools, they have a huge amount of baths, do use excessive water. But if you go to the informal settlements and the hostels, there's just no water. There's one standpipe that supplies water to over 400 people in those informal settlements. So how can it be that each person is using 237 litres? This is something we have repeatedly brought up for the last few years to government, to the regulators, whether it's water or energy, that they need to equalize this. It needs to be proper services provided for each and every one in this country, and people should be equal. What we have found, though, is that the corruption is the main where funds for investment to provide the necessary water resources to people actually lines the pockets of politicians and councillors and never gets to people on the ground.
And I just wonder, Desmond, with that revelation you've just made, does that inform the state of water scarcity as well in the country?
Well, it does inform it in the sense that, the infrastructure has collapsed and many municipalities is a prime example of it, where we've repeatedly recorded infrastructures collapsing since just before the 2009 Soccer World Cup in 2010. We have been reporting this year that most of the infrastructure has collapsed because of the lack of resources and maintenance of that infrastructure. And that continues to happen now because there's just no money, and the money has moved away to big infrastructure, to big projects. So they don't look at the infrastructure projects that supplies ordinary people. Rather, what we have seen is that when the infrastructure collapses, then the sea becomes the open pit of all the sewage and all the chemicals that are dumped there. So, and in the rivers as well. So they do not have a proper plan to deal with these problems. It's a repeat occasion of it in all the poorer communities. They do not have the sanitation like other rich people have in the suburbs and in the upmarket cities in Durban. We find that the people are then forced to utilize rivers. So they don't pick up the sewage, they don't pick up the rubbish, they don't have those services, and that's the problem. And that's because the money that was supposed to be used for providing those services and developing the infrastructure is ended up in people lining their pockets up, particularly the politicians and councillors. And Durban's a known city for that.
Right.
We know the scandal.
Desmond, with that being said, what would it take then to assist South Africa with the state we're in when it comes to water scarcity? What would it take to get out of this huge problem that is affecting millions of South Africans?
Well, look, the first thing is education. There's no information that's coming out to local communities. They don't have a proper plan that can educate the community and involve them. People have a lot of knowledge. People want to be part of the solution, but government is staying away from the local people and not involving it. The second thing, if you want to manage climate change, then that in itself, and any other disaster, if you want to prevent all that there, you have to have a good management. You have to have a system that manages good environmental problems in the area. You can't just leave it alone and expect that nature will do its own work. You see that if you do not have a proper management system get the public involved, then you're going to have the floods that we have recently seen in Durban and in the province as a whole. And that in itself causes infrastructure to collapse. The other very important thing here is that all our wetlands are beginning to be destroyed. What happens is that our government doesn't have a proper plan to protect those wetlands, which act as an aquifer for our water resources and all that. Instead, we are finding that there are concrete put over the wetlands. We are finding that big trucking depots have been put over these wetlands. And as a result, you found what we saw in Durban when the containers were floating all over the water. The water had to go all over, and the power of water that moved those containers all over the M4 in the recent floods. Now, there has to be a plan. We do have an emergency disaster management center. How effective is it? We've seen during the floods, it has not been effective. And the reason that it hasn't been effective, it hasn't gone out to people. It hasn't gone to educate and keep people informed and get them involved.
Right.
We have to do that. We have to go back to the basics to get people involved and to ensure that they are not left behind. And let's listen to the people. And this is what we've been calling our city mayor, our premier, to say, come out and listen to the people and hear what they're going to say. And then go back and implement what they said.
We have to leave it there due to time, but I appreciate you contributing to this conversation. South Durban Community Environmental Alliance Coordinator Desmond D'sa, thank you for your time this morning.